Hello, my name is Austin Habish, the founder of Think Catholic, and you're listening to the Summa podcast, where we study St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae in a way simple and insightful for anyone to understand. The Summa podcast is brought to you by Think Catholic. Taking 2 questions of the Summa a day, we'll seek to summarize St. Thomas's responses, discovering the brilliance of Aquinas. And his Catholic faith is day 181. So let's get started. We're covering today questions 126 and 127 of the Secunda Secundae, that is of fearlessness and of foolhardiness. The translation that I always use in these podcasts is the one generously provided to me by Ave Maria Press, the 5-volume set translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican province, which you can now get at a discounted price from Ave Maria Press's site by typing in the code Summa 10. And so here we go. Article 1, whether fearlessness is a sin. Since the virtue of fortitude moderates fear and daring, here with fearlessness, we're going to look at the deficiency of fear, similar to how timidity denotes an excess of fear. And in the next question, we're going to look at the excess of daring, which is called foolhardiness. Fearlessness is seen in the parable of the unjust judge, as it is written in the Gospel of Luke. In a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor regarded man. Now, since fear arises from some antecedent love, for we only fear that which we love and have the possibility of losing, then for a man to not fear God or be afraid of what might happen to himself or his fellow man is a vice, because it denotes an absence of love. Does this man not love God or his own salvation or his neighbor's salvation? These loves produce fear. Therefore, this lack of fear either denotes a lack of love or, more probably, a plentitude of pride, in that one imagines themselves above all kinds of danger, even that coming from God. As St. Thomas says, that he fear none of these things cannot result from an entire lack of love, but only from the fact that he thinks it is impossible for him to be afflicted by evils contrary to the goods he loves. This is sometimes the result of pride, of soul presuming oneself and despising others. It is therefore evident that fearlessness is a vice, whether it result from lack of love, pride of soul, or dullness of understanding, yet the latter is excused from sin if it be invincible. Article 2, whether fearlessness is opposed to fortitude. In a sentence from St. Thomas, just as timidity is opposed to fortitude by excess of fear, insofar as a man fears what he ought not, and as he ought not, so too fearlessness is opposed thereto by deficiency of fear, insofar as a man fears not what he ought to fear. Moving then on to question 127, and what looks like it'll probably be a brief episode. Now we are on the excess of daring or foolhardiness. Article 1, whether daring is a sin. If we have a passion, then we can have a disordered passion, one modified or aggravated by a bad quality, a bad habit, which we call vice. And just as we can have immoderate fear through the vice of timidity, by way of excess of fear, or the vice of fearlessness by way of deficiency of fear, so too we can also have disorder in our passion of daring by means of the vice we call foolhardiness. In St. Thomas's words, daring, insofar as it denotes a vice, implies excess of passion, and this excess goes by the name of daring, wherefore it is evident that it is opposed to the virtue of fortitude, which is concerned about fear and daring. Article 2, whether daring is opposed to fortitude. And it is. Fortitude is the virtuous mean of the feelings of fear and daring, and foolhardiness denotes an excess of daring, and thus it is opposed to fortitude. Interestingly, Aquinas will argue that since our nature inclines us to the feeling of daring, for it is the emotion elicited when the possible evil is apprehended as surmountable, overcomable. This is the feeling of courage, the feeling of daring, which can then transform into anger once that evil becomes actually present and we are moved to struggle against it. And so one can have an excess of this feeling of courage, which is the vice of foolhardiness. But when naming the vice of deficiency on the other side of this feeling of daring, St. Thomas says this is just timidity, because it would be on account of an excess of fear that would blunt the appropriate degree of the feeling of courage. Giving the last word in this episode to St. Thomas, he tells us the movement of daring consists in a man taking the offensive against that which is in opposition to him, and nature inclines him to do this except insofar as such inclination is hindered by the fear of receiving harm from that source. Hence, the vice which exceeds in daring has no contrary deficiency, save only timidity. With that, we've just finished covering questions 126, 127 of the Secunda Secundae, that is, of fearlessness and of foolhardiness. My name is Austin Habish with Think Catholic, and I cannot wait to see you tomorrow.